Navigate the retail revolution with actionable insights into consumer spending powered by Affinity Solutions. By analyzing data from over 140 million cards, Affinity Solutions showcases consumer purchase behavior with unprecedented clarity. Seize the opportunity to reshape your strategy with accuracy, execute with precision, and measure with confidence. Affinity Solutions equips you to outperform in today's competitive landscape. Step into the future of retail analytics with Affinity Solutions today. Hello, listeners. Today is Wednesday, December 6th. Welcome to Behind the Numbers, Reimagining Retail, an eMarketer podcast made possible by Affinity Solutions. This is the show where we talk about how retail collides with every part of our lives. I'm your host, Sara Lebow. Today's episode topic is Thanksgiving, Cyber 5, and the holiday shopping season on the whole. Let's meet today's guests. Joining me for this episode, we have Senior Director of Briefings, Jeremy Goldman. Hey, Jeremy.
Hello, great to be with you.
Great to have you back. Also back is Senior Analyst Zak Stambor. Hey, Zak.
Hey, Sarah. Hey, Jeremy.
Hello. Okay, we are doing what is probably our last holiday episode, but time will tell. So let's dive in. Let's get started with Free Sample. Our Did You Know segment, where I share a fun fact, tidbit, or question. Today it's not a quiz, I just have a fun fact for you. I learned this yesterday. One of the first commercial aniline dyes was the color mauve, which started being marketed as such in 1859. The color was popularized by Queen Victoria, who wore a mauve gown to her daughter's wedding, sparking mauve mania and bringing about a wave of other synthetic dyes, which weren't a thing before then. I learned this from an episode of Avery Trufelman's Articles of Interest podcast, which covers the history of all things clothing. Did you guys know this about mauve?
I absolutely did not. I did not even know. I still do not know what mauve is. I am Googling it right now. So no, I had no knowledge of this.
It's one of the lesser purples, I would say, but I think it works really well as like a lip shade as a former beauty lifer. So I think of it from like a beauty lens versus fashion.
I didn't realize that synthetic dyes, I mean, it makes sense, but weren't really a thing until quite recently. And color theory wasn't really accessible to common people until pretty recently too, because colors weren't that accessible. The other thing I learned from this episode, which I honestly haven't finished yet, so maybe we'll have more fun facts next week, is I didn't know about arsenic green. Arsenic was used to create green dyes. Arsenic is poison, and that's the reason why you get a lot of like green goo motifs in like Disney movies and stuff, was this concept of arsenic green. Did either of you know that one?
I did not know that.
No clue. But it does make sense. It's interesting.
It is interesting. Okay, it's time for our next segment, Retell Me This, Retell Me That, where we discuss an interesting retail topic. Today's topic is Thanksgiving, Cyber 5, and the holiday shopping season. Cyber 5 is behind us. The holidays are ahead of us. In fact, Hanukkah starts in 2 days if you're listening to this podcast the day it comes out. So let's take a look at some holiday data. According to MasterCard's Spending Pulse, U.S. retail sales grew over 2% year over year on Black Friday. E-commerce specifically grew over 8%, while in-store sales grew way less at just 1%. Then on Cyber Monday, according to Adobe Analytics, consumer spend was up 9% year over year. So I will ask each of you what you make of this Cyber 5 data. Zak, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, I think this is just the latest sign that the Cyber 5 is not quite as important as it used to be. That said, it's certainly the centerpiece of the holiday season, but I feel like we've been in the holiday season forever at this point. The Target started its sale in October, and we've just been going ever since. And so the holiday season, when the season is so long, the Cyber 5 or Cyber Week is just not as important as it used to be.
Jeremy, what?
Yeah, sorry, I would agree. I think that part of the interesting thing about it is that, consumers have wised up. I think that there's an element of, that there are going to be really good deals then. So of course you're going to shop then. But it's also true that some people will find some good early deals. We obviously had Prime Big Deal Days that was in October, and then you had other competitors that had, arguably less successful, but still they had sales, at that time. So just the spend is being pushed around a little bit. There's also broader awareness from, I can say this anecdotally, but, in some of the folks that I've been speaking to about, are they expecting to get more sales a little bit later in the holiday season? And part of it is because, again, the consumer is aware that they can get better deals later on. And that's obviously going to be one of those forces that decreases, the ability of Cyber 5 to perform at the way that it, maybe would have in previous years.
That said, discounts were pretty steep. In electronics, they were down like 31%. In toys, prices were down like 27%. That's compared to the prices on October 1st. And so if you were out there looking for a deal, you probably did find one.
Yeah, also purely anecdotally, it does feel like the sense of urgency surrounding Cyber 5 has muted itself maybe a little bit, but it's still there. I mean, this year we saw Amazon Prime have the first NFL Black Friday game, and that came with its own shoppable ads. So, like, it's there. It's there on television. It's there on streaming. Cyber 5 is alive and well. And we have used this headline every year, but Cyber Monday broke records, and part of that breaking records is that people are spending more than ever because inflation, but it still broke records. The spend is still there.
Well, and it's not only inflation. There is volume growth, and that's pretty notable because last year a lot of the gains were inflation, but this year people really are buying more stuff.
Speaking more about how this year compares to other years, this year e-commerce will account for a higher share of holiday sales than ever before at 19%. When we say than ever before, that includes 2020. It's about a full percentage or nearly a full percentage point higher than e-commerce share was in 2020 when people were heavily discouraged and afraid to visit stores. So e-commerce share, even higher than that. Why this shift? Why is this growing even more than what felt like the peak?
We're heading back to the patterns that we saw pre-pandemic, where e-commerce gains were very strong over the holiday season and brick and mortar gains were far more muted. And that's just because life's returning to normal. That said, e-commerce, I mean, you said it's almost 19, or it will be over 19% this year, share of overall holiday sales. And that's really notable, particularly if you look at where we were at pre-pandemic in 2019. E-commerce was only 14% of over holiday spending, so it's really gained a sizable share of how consumers are spending.
Yeah, I mean, that 19% compares to, on the whole, outside of the holiday season. So our holiday forecast covers the last quarter. And when we look at the whole year, e-commerce makes up 15.6, so close to 16% of overall retail sales. So we're definitely seeing a more pronounced e-commerce holiday season as it compares to the rest of the year. That said, a lot of that is because holiday shopping is more likely to be e-commerce type shopping. I mean, grocery we know has a lower e-commerce penetration. That's less likely to be holiday shopping unless you do what my mom used to do when we were kids and wrap up dried mango as a special Hanukkah gift because you need to make the gifts last for 8 days. But yeah, definitely higher e-commerce penetration during the holiday season.
Yeah, I think people are leaning into the convenience too. The holidays are a busy time, and when you can just pull out your phone and click and buy when you're on the go, when you're at your kid's sports game or whatever it is that you're doing, that's much easier than schlepping to a store.
Yeah, I definitely know that my parents would have wanted that convenience when we were younger rather than having to sit through 80 rounds of swimming heats waiting for me to take my turn.
Right.
Let's look ahead into 2024. We're seeing e-commerce grow the way it was before the pandemic. Is it going to continue growing in 2024 and beyond? Is there a ceiling for e-commerce penetration when it comes to holiday spend?
The short answer is that yes, there is actual growth to happen over the next few years, but at some point, we are seeing diminishing returns, and this is something that we looked at for our recent Future of Digital 2024 report, where we basically compared the U.S. to a number of other markets where e-commerce has higher penetration, and just tried to say, does the U.S. get there anytime soon? And in a lot of cases, the answer is no. And that's just because we have a really strong retail brick and mortar infrastructure in the U.S. And for that reason, it's just a different paradigm than some other markets that maybe didn't have that same brick and mortar infrastructure built up. And because of that, when e-commerce came along, it was able to get more market share there. So e-commerce, while overall growth is slowing down, it's important to acknowledge that this is off of a pretty big base. So every 1%, 2% more of sales represents quite a number of sales. And that's something that's always important to keep in mind when looking at percentages.
Yeah. I mean, if Amazon had it their way, I'm sure that the dream would be total e-commerce penetration, because Amazon is a company that can't totally figure out the brick and mortar game. But in the US, so much holiday sales, so many sales in general are driven by Walmart. And a lot of e-commerce sales is driven by Walmart too. Walmart stores are their fulfillment centers. They want you to shop e-commerce, but they also want you coming into their stores. They want you doing things like click and collect, where you're maybe doing both. So yeah, I think that it's not the either or when it comes to e-commerce holiday penetration and e-commerce penetration on the whole.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point, is the way in which we think of these things as in one bucket or the other is probably not quite right. It's not really how these stores, particularly Walmart, particularly Target, and a few others, are approaching things. And when you use your store as a fulfillment center, which is a trend that we're seeing accelerate, we're seeing Target, Costco, and others debut stores that integrate a fulfillment center or have more space to fulfill online orders within the store. As that builds, we'll just see more of this melding. And it's for click and collect, but also some people will undoubtedly find their way into the store once they do come to pick up their order.
That's, by the way, that's such a critical point that Zak is bringing up, the convergence, which is, again, something that we talk about in Future of Digital. The convergence is critical because if you're looking at a store, versus an e-commerce sale, the lines are blurring in between what is what because of how the store is being used from a logistics standpoint. And then if you also think about it as in terms of like a digital sale versus a e-commerce sale, then so many sales are digitally, enhanced, or digital is used in some way. It's very common for people to, even use an e-commerce site, through their mobile phone while they're in the store, which then helps them drive sales. So not to totally derail us, but there is definitely a convergence that's happening between online and offline.
Yeah, I was talking to Target's retail media network, Roundell's president, Sarah Travis, at Adweek, and she told me that something like 80% of Target shoppers in store are either using their website or their app while shopping in store. That means that shopper might be making an in-store purchase, or they might be making a purchase while in store on the app or on the website, or they might be leaving the store and then making that purchase, or they might be looking at the app and then coming into the store and making that purchase. And even if they are making that purchase in store, they might be using a coupon from the app or their digital wallet. So yeah, I think it's important that we draw these lines and important that we look at e-commerce versus in-store penetration. But those lines aren't really there. And the same consumer could be buying something from Target in store the same day that they're buying something online. So I do think that there is ultimately a ceiling for e-commerce penetration. We are definitely not seeing the end of stores.
Well, and also when you need to buy something for the party that you're going to in an hour, you kind of need to run to the store to just grab it.
Yes. Shout out to my local wine store that is directly on the corner of my block. And I've only ever been in a rush while being in there. Okay, let's keep moving. Now it's time for our segment, Red Hot Retail. This is our guest's opportunity to give us their very specific and potentially risky predictions on a topic. The predictions can be mild, medium, spicy, or extra hot. Or if you're Jeremy, a specific pepper that you decide to assign. The higher the spice level, the riskier the prediction. Zak and Jeremy will each give me 2 predictions today for the last few weeks of the holiday shopping season. Jeremy, I picked on you, so why don't you go first?
I feel like that's a reason I should go second, but fine. I mean, I think that there's a lot of really interesting things to potentially focus on. I think this one is a little bit more like a habanero level,
Oof.
which we all know is spicy, but like could be a lot worse. And that is, I think that buy now, pay later predictions for this holiday season might actually outperform expectations. There are a lot of people who use buy now, pay later. We actually have a pretty significant delta. We believe that the overall BNPL payment value in the U.S. is going to rise a nearly 20%, 19.7% year over year in 2023. I think we're probably going to see closer to 25 to 30% for the holiday season, simply because people look at things, they've got a high degree of confidence in 2024, and they're going to say, what the heck, and they're going to buy things where it's not going to really hit their wallet right now. So that gives them the confidence to spend more.
So do you think that we're going to see then a holiday hangover because you bought something that you're now paying off for $50 every month and it's February and you're still paying that off? Are we going to see slower sales early next year?
I think we'll see a holiday hangover no matter what. We always see a little bit of it, right? You're just not getting, the deals no matter what there. And it's important to notice that, BNPL is growing at a rapid pace, but still the majority of sales are done through things like credit cards, and obviously people have credit card debt, and that doesn't stop people from, buying anything in months to come. So, hangover is probably a thing that, you'll typically see no matter what.
Yeah, my cynical take is that the psychological blow of that long BNPL tail of payment doesn't really take an impact on purchasing. Maybe that's not a cynical take if you're a retailer, but it's kind of a cynical take if you're a BNPL user. I think that the purchase has already been made and they're not really thinking about the money that's coming out of their bank account. Zak, why don't you give us our next spice level, next prediction?
Yeah, so I've done my research. I think this is like a dragon's breath level spice level, which is pretty hot. Pretty hot. Pretty spicy.
This is pretty.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah. So I think Best Buy is going to have a better than expected holiday season. Consumer electronics as a category as a whole had a pretty good Cyber 5, in part thanks to steep discounting, but nonetheless, people were buying them. And Best Buy's customer base skews upper income. They over-index among higher-income consumers, so they're less affected by things like high borrowing costs and credit card debt. And so I think they're going to splurge. I think Best Buy is going to exceed expectations, which would be really good news for a retailer that's had a tough go of it.
Is that going to take a chunk out of another retailer like Amazon, or do you think that it's just going to be sort of sharing the wealth all around?
I think Amazon certainly sells a lot of consumer electronics and really is probably Best Buy's top competitor in the space. But I think Amazon has a broad enough breadth of products that it won't be particularly notable.
A broad enough dragon's breath of products. Jeremy, why don't you give us our next spice level, next prediction?
I think this is Scotch bonnet level, which is like a little bit
hot.
Oof. Yeah. It's hot, but it's a little bit lower than a habanero. So
okay.
Yeah. So people are learning a lot about spices.
This is an educational podcast.
Yes. I think that ultimately, we tend to look at retailers in the short term in terms of how many sales did they drive. But I think that especially when we look at Q4 overall, you're going to see that there are a number of retailers that might have even sat Black Friday out. Maybe they didn't entirely, sit the Cyber 5 out, but they thought a little bit more holistically about what discounts do to their bottom line, and actually might have looked maybe not as good from an overall sales standpoint, but they focused more on their margins, and they'll have really good Q4s for us to look at come end of January. That's something that I'm really looking forward to doing, is just diving into the numbers and seeing who maybe didn't drive as much sales, but they were able to keep those margins tighter at a time when a lot of retailers are just focused on moving product.
So last year we saw really steep discounting in Q4, especially in certain areas like toys. Did that end up having sort of the opposite effect in earnings in Q1 of this year?
That's what I was kind of looking at to prepare for this, just digging up some old transcripts, because that's the kind of things that analysts like to do, kids. But I think that was one thing that a number of people pointed to within their earnings. It's just the fact that the discounting that happened, and obviously the expanding holiday season, into more of Q4 means that you're discounting more of the time. That's what we saw some of last year. And again, it's about being shrewd as a retailer and figuring out what you have to offer and not offering necessarily more than that. And there are going to be a few retailers that we're going to be surprised by where they had a better Q4 than we thought, simply because of that reason.
Will you wager any guesses about specific retailers?
No, because then it would be a higher spice level, and I already committed to a spice level.
Fair enough. All right, Zach, why don't you give us our final spice level prediction?
I went out hot, and I'm going to pull back to a mild banana pepper. And I think this
I have some in my fridge. Great on a sandwich.
Yeah. So I think this holiday season is going to be a story of haves and have-nots. And consumers are largely going to consolidate their spending with a few retailers rather than spread it widely. And so the Amazons and Walmarts of the world will probably come out pretty well, while some smaller retailers may suffer.
I mean, yeah, that's kind of the name of the retail game, it feels like right now. I mean, will there be a time in the future that's not the Amazons and Walmarts of the world doing well while smaller retailers suffer?
Right. I think that's right. And I think everyone else who isn't one of these larger retailers is just in a tough spot, because it's hard to grab share and gain attention when these retailers are just so large and so easily capture consumers' attention.
I think we'll continue to see excitement surrounding smaller retailers, cult following retailers, niche products. I don't think that's ever going away. I think that every year we'll see some D2C emerge, or some shoe brand emerge that really gets a lot of buzz. But I think you're right. When you talk about the top line, it's a drop in the ocean.
Exactly.
Okay, well, that is all that we have time for today. So thank you for joining me, Jeremy.
It's a pleasure as always.
Thank you, Zach.
Thanks for having me.
Happy Hanukkah, holidays, etc. to you both. Please give us a rating wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow us on Instagram at Insider Intelligence. Thank you to our listeners, and to John, who is filling in for Victoria and editing the podcast this week. We'll be back next Wednesday with another episode of Reimagining Retail, an eMarketer podcast made possible by Affinity Solutions. And tomorrow, join Marcus for another episode of the Behind the Numbers Daily.